Good morning. Welcome to the final day of the Policy Profession Festival. My name is Arlene Holmes-Henderson and I will be the chair for this hour-long session on working with academics, widening the evidence base for policy. I am Professor of Classics Education and Public Policy at Durham University, and I am delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel here today to talk about the bridge between the academic community and the policy community. Our objectives for this session today are to do three things. We want to talk about how you as policymakers can discover and use a wider range of research. We want to talk about facilitating those connections, and we also want to talk about funding, the funding that is available outside the civil service for you to access and use this research. I'm going to chair a conversation with the panelists for around 30 minutes. And after that, it's over to you. We have got 20 minutes or so for discussion. And I would encourage you, whilst we are talking as a panel, to be putting your questions into the chat. If you've been part of Policy Profession Festival events already, you'll be very familiar with the use of Slido. Any questions you've got for the panel, put them in there, and you have the opportunity to upvote questions. So if somebody else asks a question and you think, oh yeah, that's a great one, I really want to hear that one answered, then upvote it and we'll make sure that that one definitely gets asked. We have a combination of presenters for you today, both from the academic world, but also from the policy world, and I would ask them to introduce themselves now. First off, we'll start with Pascal.
Hi, my name is Pascal Abisher. I am Professor of Shakespeare and Early Modern Performance Studies at the University of Exeter. And that probably makes you wonder what on earth I'm doing in this panel. Well, during the COVID pandemic, I took on the coordination of the Arts and Humanities COVID response. So that was over 70 projects across the UK that were invested in thinking about how to mitigate and investigate the impacts of COVID on the population more broadly, and the sorts of questions that simple sort of scientific methods could not get to the bottom of. So what I did was look after these teams and help them communicate with policymakers and bring their research findings and their evidence to policymakers. And so that's where I'm coming from, and this has completely transformed my own outlook on research. So since the start of the pandemic, I have started to really engage with policymakers much more concertedly, and currently I'm leading a project that is funded by the British Academy. So that is my little answer to the question about funders. Potential funders. The British Academy is funding research on pandemic preparedness, and I'm leading the project about pandemic preparedness in the theatre industry across the G7, comparing data from all the G7 countries and taking that to policymakers in DCMS, the Arts Council, Equity, BEC2, and the industry itself. So that's me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Pascal. So your university representation today, colleagues, is from me in Durham in the northeast, all the way down to Pascal in Exeter in the southwest. Let's move over now to our funders on the panel and start with Christina.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Good morning, everyone. Really pleasure to be here. My name is Christina Zaidi, and I'm Associate Director of Programs at the Arts and Humanities Research Councils, UKRI. Over my nearly 15 years in research councils, I had various roles and responsibilities, including in the Economic and Social Research Council, where I actually started my research council's career. Currently in HRC, I'm overseeing public policy, public engagement, and our international portfolios. And these portfolios, as you can imagine, are quite broad and diverse, and they include different partnerships, nationally and internationally, research and knowledge exchange programs, policy and evidence centers fellowships, just to mention but a few. And in many instances, we work very closely with other research councils and ESRC in particular, and I think we will talk about it quite a number of times today, but also with public policy organizations at national and local level as well, in designing and delivering our various policy-orientated schemes and programs. And I think that really important point we want to bring up, that engagement from design stage through to delivery as a part of a very successful engagement. In my previous career, I worked in the central government, albeit in a different country, as you can maybe hear. And my academic background is in social sciences, politics, and IR. And as a professional and as a scholar, I was always interested in policy and research interface, and engaged where possible in sharing my own experience and a bit of knowledge I accumulated from research via running training and some targeted publications. So very excited to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally on to James.
Thanks, Arlene, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invite today. It's great to be here. I'm James Canton. I'm Deputy Director for Public Policy and Engagement at the Economic and Social Research Council, which is part of UK Research and Innovation, as well as AHRC. And my team within ESRC aims to make it easier for policymakers to access research, evidence and expertise and data from universities and from the academic sector. And we run a number of schemes, which I'll hopefully get a chance to tell you about a bit later, which connect policymakers with researchers from the social sciences, but also more broadly disciplines such as the arts and humanities, the biological sciences, the medical sciences, amongst others. And we work across all Whitehall departments. We work with all the devolved administrations, and increasingly we're working with local authorities as well. And before I joined ESRC, I'd worked for the Department for Transport and what was then at the time MHCLG. And I worked across research and policy roles. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, James. I'm not going to give you a long introduction as to who I am. I've written several blogs for the policy profession. So if you're interested in the work that I've done with several government departments and with all party parliamentary groups, and my kind of national role for championing policy engagement with arts and humanities academics and policymakers, you can read about those in my blogs. So without further ado, I would like to move on to my very first question for the panel. Can you explain what successful policy engagement with research looks like to you? First, I think we should come from the academic perspective. Pascal, what does successful policy engagement with research look like from your perspective?
So what I would say, just based on that experience of looking after all these projects and then designing my own research project in light of what I learned, it is about being in a dialogue that is ongoing and that starts before a research project even begins. So there's a sort of run-up period to the design of a research project where it's really helpful for us to have a sense of what the policy landscape is, what are the problems that you are encountering in your work, and how do they marry up with the problems that we see when we are looking at a problem from an academic viewpoint. And then it's about co-designing the research questions. So it doesn't mean that I, as an academic, have to give up my integrity or sort of my own ideas about the research. It means that I'm responsive to what you might bring to me and can integrate your questions in my questions, and then work alongside policymakers throughout the project, touching base, feeding early findings and sort of preliminary things that aren't ready for publication yet to you, and get your feedback on what we're finding, on whether it's useful and how it might be more useful, so that when I finally get to the end of a project, I know that the research that I'm doing is going to be suitable not just for an academic audience, but also for a policy audience. And then if we can then carry on that relationship beyond the end point with proper acknowledgement of the fact that this has been done in a co-created way. And the one thing that you need to understand as sort of users of our research is that the incentive for us comes out of the rewards that we get for being acknowledged as having had an impact on policy. So for us, the carrot at the end is you're sort of being able to write a letter or put us in a footnote or in some way publicly acknowledge our input, so that we can then take that back to our departments, to our universities, and feed it into the dreaded research excellence framework that evaluates our work. So that's the really important thing to us. And I think when we have this sort of mutual relationship where you feed into our questions and we feed the research back to you and refine it with you, that's when we have really successful and strong policy engagement. And I would say also, don't be afraid of us. We may speak funny, but we are just human beings, and we're trained in our own context to speak in the language that we know, but that doesn't make us sort of weird. It just makes us people you have to be attentive to and sort of make allowances for when we're not entirely clear. And if we're not entirely clear in your terms, then just say, I don't get it, could you try again? And we'll have another go. So that'd be my bits here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pascal. And Christina, I'm interested from a funder's perspective. What does successful policy engagement with research look like to you?
I think, thank you very much. I think I will not be very different to what Pascal has already said, but I just want to start by saying that I think there shouldn't be a single formula what the success looks like. It so much depends on the context. Depends on the national versus local priorities from department to department. So there is no single formula, but it's important also to be realistic what success might look like and when it might happen. So be forgiven to timescales and be also open to changes in the process, because research process is not linear and it can actually lead to something unexpected rather than reinforcing existing knowledge. Sometimes it's important, but the benefit of engaging with research, I think, is that being open to discovering new solutions, understanding maybe broadening understanding what the problem is, and then tailoring the solution accordingly. And as long as this engagement leads to a positive outcome, it's on the pathway to success. Sometimes it can lead to a significant change, for example, in legislation. Sometimes it may be a very small scale change in practice, or even change in perception of what the problem is. And then those solutions might be required. And it can be in a very hyper-local level, improving lives of local communities, and can be national level. And I think it's important to have that mutual understanding from the beginning what the desired outcome of engagement is. And Pascal mentioned it already several times. Work together in designing the research questions and then seeing them through and altering as well in the process, but being throughout the process in dialogue, and it only this clarity, I think, will only improve relationships and trust in which is really important, and also be clear what is possible within given time frames. I think that's really important, and not being fixated what the outcome could be. So again, being open to unexpected, and I think this is an advantage of a long-term engagement with academic research as well. And so be realistic and focus on the art of possible. An academic researcher, however gifted, is not going to change policy overnight. And sometimes it is the incremental changes that throughout a longer period of time that actually will make a meaningful and sustainable change. And of course, I want to echo also what Pascal said at the end, and also from the funder's perspective, it's It's important for us to know what the change, what change research has made, and being able to identify the contribution research we funded made. We fully acknowledge that there will be other contributing factors as well, but it's important for us to know how our funded research helped to introduce a change, however small it is. Hence, having those references in writing and rhetoric is very helpful to measure success for us as well. So thank you for doing that already, and we would like to see even more of that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So if you want to see an example of what a good partnership looks like, I have co-authored a blog with a colleague at the Department for Education, Hannah Jack, and that's on the Policy Profession blog. You can see what this looks like from the perspective of an academic and the Department for Education. I've also written a blog with top tips for policymakers who want to reach out to academics but are not entirely sure what language to use or what rewards to promise. You can find that on the Policy Profession blog. Moving on now, I would love to ask the panel, what are the best channels through which to engage with academics from a variety of backgrounds? James.
Thanks, Arlene. And just to start, I guess, with a bit of context. So in the UK, we really do have an excellent research system. We've got excellent talent. There's a real wealth of and a variety of evidence, data and expertise out there that can be used to address policy challenges. And as a country, I think currently we spend in the region of 15 billion a year on research and innovation. So our research system is a real national asset. However, we know that it's often difficult for policymakers to access a diversity, a variety of academic expertise and evidence. And many policymakers actually start with pre-existing connections or relationships, people they know. But if you really want to widen the evidence base, which is what this session is about, I'd suggest that you start with a broker. And brokers are organisations or people who sit on the boundary between the research world and the policy world. And the way I think of brokers is that you have brokers within government. So you've got analytical professions like the Government Social Research, Government Economic Service, Government Office for Science, and the Open Innovation Team, and they are all very well connected with the academic research community. You've also got brokers in the academic community as well. The University Policy Engagement Network, for example, can support finding experts. You've also got University College London's capabilities in academic policy engagement, and there are a variety of other brokers in the academic sector. And finally, you've got brokers within the funding community as well. So UKRI and ESRC, we can act as brokers. For example, within ESRC, we have teams related to policy relevant themes around the environment, health, crime, economic growth. And those teams can really help you find the expertise and the evidence that you need that we invest in. And hopefully we'll come to this in a minute, but we also have a range of other funding mechanisms which can support policymakers accessing expertise. One last thing I'd say on this question is that we've just published a government areas of research interest question database with the Government Office for Science. It's a really innovative tool. It uses artificial intelligence to draw connections between your government questions and the expertise that UK research and innovation is investing in. So do take a look at that. It's a really great resource.
Fantastic. Thank you for those suggestions, James. Pascal, I'd be interested for your opinion on this, because what we hear from policymakers is it's hard to find people beyond the usual suspects. So what are your suggestions for engaging with academics from a variety of backgrounds?
Yeah, so I'm very much sort of building on what James has been saying, in the sense that brokers are a very important way into broadening the field. And in particular for me, as an academic, the things that I have had cascaded to me have come to me via our own university's Policy at Exeter unit. So lots of universities, over 40 now, I think, have got their own policy units. And these policy units are responsible for being the interface between organisations like UPEN, with its newsletter, or the knowledge exchange unit from Parliament that also produces information. And what they do is that they extract the information that comes to them via these other brokers. So we have brokers of brokers, if you like, and they translate it into a newsletter that is internal to my institution. And I'm sure this happens across the UK. And that is targeting specifically the research topics that they know we are working on. So that is a really good way of getting to the grassroots. And if you have a particular research interest that has to do with a particular region of the UK, why not look up the policy units of the institutions in that region? Because very often we are doing research that is particular to our region. So if you are looking to do something in the Southwest, the University of Exeter, the University of Plymouth, the University of Bristol would be good places to have a look and send the question to the policy unit, and they will find locally the person who can best answer your question, so that you can broaden the reach of the research that you're doing. And one of the issues that we have when we are located outside London is that very often sort of the long established relationships are London-centric and focused on London researchers. Now, I don't have a problem with London researchers at all, except when they're talking about the Southwest, at which point it does become a bit of an issue. So if you are trying to actually do the levelling up, do go out into the regions and talk to the people who are doing the research out in the regions with their local communities, because they will be able to give you a far more granular understanding of what the lived experience of that region is actually like.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've heard UPEN mentioned a few times now. How can the university's policy engagement network support engagement for policymakers? James, I saw you at the UPEN conference this year. I think you would be really well placed to offer some advice on this one.
Yeah, happy to. And I think UPEN is a really great way to start engagement. And I'm a really big supporter of the initiative. And I know that ESRC has supported the development of this network in the past, which is really positive. And I know that there have also been really strong connections between UPEN and the policy profession as well. So as you mentioned, Arlene, I was at the UPEN conference this summer, and I think the policy profession was really well represented at the conference, which was great to see. And there was actually, from memory, a Director General from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, the head of the policy profession in that department, opening the conference, which was great. So UPEN, from my perspective, is very well networked in academia. I think the membership now runs to over 100 universities and academic institutions, and with a network that large, UPEN will be able to help you find the right people, the right diversity of expertise you need for your policy challenge. And I think organisations like UPEN can also support policymakers developing questions that the research community can address. They can support with translating research findings into actionable solutions for policymakers. They could perhaps even support you commissioning research in the academic sector if that's something you're interested in doing. And I've also heard that UPEN have supported some departments with training and capability building within government, and I know that they also provide training capability building to academics as well about how to engage with policymakers. So overall, I think they're a really great resource to draw upon. But Arlene, I know you're part of UPEN, so you might want to say a few more words on that as well.
Yeah, I should identify myself at this point as Vice Chair of UPEN. I have national remit for Arts and Humanities engagement with research, and I endorse everything that James just said. So we are a network of more than 120 universities across the United Kingdom, and absolutely we offer training. But Pascal mentioned the UPEN update. So this is a newsletter that goes out every week to the policy units in universities, but also directly to academics. And so if you've got something that you need some help with, or if you've got an event coming up where you would like academics or policy professionals within universities to be present, contact UPEN and ask them to include it in the UPEN update. We also have a number of subcommittees subcommittees, and we have some representatives from the civil service on these subcommittees. They're all open. They are all free to join. So if you would like to widen your network within the academic and university policy community, then I think UPEN is a really efficient way for you to do that. And as James mentioned, we have an annual conference. Again, there were a number of policymakers there. It is always fantastic. You always learn lots. So this is a big cheer for UPEN. Do check it out. Right, we're coming on to the question that probably you all are desperate to hear the answer to in the era of restricted budgets. What funding is available to widen the evidence base? Where can you access the money to be able to work effectively with academics? So I'll come to Christina first, from the Arts and Humanities Research Council perspective.
Thank you very much, Arlene. And I think I probably wouldn't be unique to Art and Humanities. And I said we work very closely with other research councils and ESRC in particular. And James has already mentioned policy fellowships, and I'm sure they will be mentioned again. And as HRC, we developed a range of public policy initiatives and covering different remits and programs of different sizes and also duration and a scale of intervention. And this includes large policy-focused initiatives such as policy and evidence centres in particular areas. We worked closely with government departments, including and universities, to identify the areas. And this includes some modern challenges such as modern slavery, but also areas like creative industries. And for example, issues around cultural value and how we measure that. But we also have programs working directly with policy partners, such as a policy fellowship scheme. And currently, I would probably divide our supported activities into kind of several categories. So one of those that working directly in policy settings. So these are placements and research to policy, I would call them. But they are not only researchers. We also support practitioner placements, particularly artist placements, to help improve the decision-making process, bringing in different perspectives and methodologies that can often bring to unexpected perspectives. And the other example is grants that look directly to policy impact, such as policy and evidence centres, working directly with government departments, devolved administrations, and also businesses. And also examples that we work closely with policy stakeholders and that develop programs together. And that, again, I'm bringing that co-design word. And examples include, for example, we work very closely with DCMS and Culture and Heritage Capital Research Programme as one of the examples. And then, of course, there are training opportunities. And I think it's been mentioned already in the UPEN context, but we work with the Institute for Government for over a decade now, organising engaging with government courses that target specifically arts and humanities researchers and help them to equip with the practical knowledge and skills of how to engage with policy, because it's not always very straightforward for arts and humanities researchers. Also, one thing. But it might also be a perception, because we have very good examples where these work is happening very successfully. And then there is also what we call an open call, so that research grants that have a policy engagement element in that researchers can apply, and to support partnership development, and then sometimes these partnerships develop during the lifetime of the research. So we have follow-on funding scheme when researchers can apply to support the translation and impact aspects of arriving from their research. So there are different mechanisms that exist, and we also fund short-term interventions, such as, for example, scoping studies to understand what are the research gaps and what are the research questions that should be asked before we and we do it jointly, often with public policy bodies, to then help inform future programs. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I'd love to hear, James, do you have anything to add to this question on what funding is available to widen the evidence base?
Yeah, a bit to add from UKRI and the SRC. So UKRI does really invest a significant amount into research that's policy relevant, and impact is really key to us. It's a key part of our strategy. So we're really keen to partner and co-fund research with government departments. Do have a look at our UKRI strategic themes. Each is a £75 million research fund over the next 5 years, and the themes are building a green future, securing better health, ageing and well-being, tackling infections, building a secure and resilient world, and creating opportunities and improving outcomes, which is about reducing regional disparities. And each of those themes covers the full breadth of UKRI research disciplines, from arts and humanities right through to engineering and obviously social science as well. And within ESRC, we've developed a range of initiatives that help government get the evidence they need in a variety of different ways. So Christina's already mentioned policy fellowships, so we support people exchange and secondments. Our 2023 call is going to see around 47 academic researchers join 22 government departments across Whitehall and the devolved nations. We also invest in centres that look to generate long-term experimental evidence. So we invest in the What Works network. We co-fund with government departments for those centres. And we are increasingly as well investing in schemes that aim to provide rapid advice to support policymakers. And also those schemes run expert roundtables and help broker to relevant expertise. So do have a look at the Economics Observatory and the International Public Policy Observatory as well. We also have a call out at the moment, the Policy Talent Accelerator, and that's to support civil servants engaging with universities as part of their professional development. So look out for that one as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. So I can understand from the audience perspective, this might feel like you've just been bombarded with information about all of the funding that is available. The good news is that I have written a blog for the Policy Profession blog on the funding available to civil servants who want to engage with academics in order to drive forward policy thinking. I've collated, as part of that blog, links to the opportunities that the panel have mentioned this morning, but also links to individual university funding opportunities, for example, the one which funded my collaboration with the Department for Education. So you can check that out, and hopefully the links that you can find there will save you doing a lot of searching online yourself. Okay, so I'm going to ask my final question to the panel now, and then it's over to you and your questions. And the final question is, what is the value for policymakers of engaging with research outside traditional STEM disciplines? I'm going to come to Christina first as our representative from the Arts and Humanities Research Council.
Thank you very much, Arlene. And I think it's important to look through the prism of the challenge, what the challenge is. And strategic themes, for example, that James has mentioned, is a good example of it. We think about climate change and adaptation. We think about fighting infection diseases, tackling wider health and well-being issues, or strengthening our resilience. These are all very complex issues, and they cannot be solved from the prism of one discipline or a number of disciplines from a particular kind of scientific area. They all require interdisciplinarity, and that's the approach that UKRI is taking in designing these themes and funding these themes. So thinking about what the problem is and what input is required to solve the particular issue in a sustainable manner that does impact life in a positive way. And I think that will bring a lot of arts and humanities perspective and social science perspective. And so I think this is the starting point. And I'm just actually in a conference now in Manchester that is HRC and DCMS Heritage and Climate Change Research Programme, and it brings together arts and humanities, researchers, geographers, archaeologists, climate scientists to look at the complex issues of climate change and heritage. So this is just one example. Because we can't look at this issue separately. So start looking through the challenge prism, and then it will lead you to the right kind of approach to what disciplines one would require to resolve it. Thank you.
Fantastic. I love that so much. Start looking through the challenge prism. I love this metaphor. And also the example that you were able to give, Christina. It's really easy to think about the value of arts and humanities research, but it's sometimes quite difficult to see how it actually applies. So the example that you've given of the conference that you're attending in Manchester today really brings that to life. Pascal, what do you think is the value for policymakers of engaging with research outside traditional STEM boundaries? Obviously, you're an academic in arts and humanities, so what's your perspective on this?
So what I would say is that it's really important, as you're looking through the challenge prism, to also keep in sight the human being that we all are, and to remember that the types of methodologies that are often sort of implicitly, if not explicitly, asked for in the ARIs that are published by government departments, those types of methodologies don't necessarily tell you something about human beings and the experience of dealing with the impact of policy decisions on the ground. The types of methodologies that come from arts and humanities often involve engaged research with stakeholders on the ground. And sometimes, our sample sizes are not huge. And that is a good thing, because we might be talking to the right people rather than to thousands of people. So I'll just give you one example. During the pandemic, a colleague of mine, Sarah Gong at the University of Leicester, was working with immigrant Chinese communities, and she was working with a very small sample size. But she was talking directly to the people who were showing vaccine resistance, or resistance to being vaccinated. And that allowed her to understand exactly what the drivers were, what the political and cultural and social and human drivers were that were making these particular communities not take up the vaccine offer. And it allowed her to then advise public health officials on how to deal with this particular pocket of people who were going to be a problem within the sort of broader vaccination drive. And it's that sort of granularity, and it's that sort of insight into the local population, and also the ability then of the researchers to work with those people. So they are already making changes on the ground through their research, but they are also able to talk to you about what they're finding, and they are able to impact on policy. So it's that sort of ability to tap into the more sort of rounded understanding of what policy might mean to people that you can get through arts and humanities. And I will sort of shoehorn in a plea about the ARIs to just be mindful as you are articulating them, that you need to be appealing to a broader base, and that you need to be articulating these questions in a way that does not presume necessarily an understanding on the part of the academics of very, for us, arcane things like the Green Book or the Magenta Book or the Aqua Book, because that is not our job. I'm afraid that that is the civil servant's job, to then take what we can give you and translate it into sort of calculations around cost effectiveness and benefits and opportunities. Because what we can do is something very different, and that is actually give you that access to the lived experience.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pascal. And I would echo Pascal's plea around areas of research interest, around the terminology and the wording used in those. I do a lot of training for academics on how to do policy engagement, how to speak to policymakers. And it's really difficult when I'm working with arts and humanities researchers, because a lot of the areas of research interest are quite exclusive of that group of researchers, because they're written, it seems to me, for social scientists and for scientists. So as Pascal says, our plea to you is if these can be widened out in a way that seems like our research is also valuable to you, then that would be fantastic. That would be a fantastic result of today's policy profession session. So over to you now. I am delighted to see that we've got lots of really interesting questions from the audience this morning. So I'm now going to put as many of these as I can to the panel, and I'm going to ask the panel to keep their answers short so that we can get through as many as we can. So the first one is from Ben Gittins. And he says he would like to hear more about the barriers as well as the incentives for connecting academics with policymakers. Have any panel members ever objected to an invite to contribute based on their understanding of the politics of the research, or vice versa, felt that a project spoke to them? Pascal.
I haven't come across that. So what I find is that colleagues might rant privately about what they perceive to be the politics, but then they will be very keen to engage and demonstrate how the evidence that they have collected might effect a change in the thing that they object to. So academics are actually trained to be working with evidence, and they are very keen to have impacts. So I have not come across that particular barrier, that sort of mental barrier. There are plenty of other barriers, like the different languages that we speak, and the fact that we might not be able to speak your language, you might not be able to speak our language, but both sides need to move some way towards each other in order to be able to engage successfully. And I would say, just because I've seen the other chat questions, that talking to us is much better than writing to us, because when we are in direct sort of one-to-one communication, the lines are far clearer and we can clarify right away, and nobody delves deep into jargon in those sorts of situations. So panels and presentations are really good ways of engaging with academics.
Fantastic. And next, James.
Thanks. And I'll say a bit about the broader challenges and politicised policy areas. Definitely one challenge, but there are other challenges such as limited movement of people and expertise between sectors, between academia and the policy world. I think policymakers also sometimes struggle to navigate the R&D system, research and innovation, because it's so big. There are so many universities, there are so many experts, and that's why I think that brokers are so key here. They can really help you navigate that system. There are also challenges related to the capability of researchers and their ability to engage and influence policymakers. And I'd really welcome more policymakers engaging with doctoral training centres, for example, or engaging with postdoc schemes. We ran a postdoc scheme with DLUC and the Welsh Government recently, and they came in and talked with our students, our researchers, our early career academics, and helped them build their capabilities in this space. There are also limited. There's also a limited capacity in the civil service and government actually to actually engage, absorb, and use research findings. So paying careful attention to training and development in the civil service is really important. And then we've also got the kind of perennial problems of differing incentives and timelines as well. I'll come back to the politics point very quickly, just to say I think my experience is that policymakers actually really do value academic independence, and for academics there are a variety of different types of policymakers that you can engage, from Parliament, MPs, Lords, through to the civil service, not meant to be quite as political, obviously, right through to people who are involved in practice and delivery. And you don't always have to pick the people who are involved in the politics to be able to influence the outcomes, I'd say. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. And Christina.
Very, very briefly, I think just to add, I think it's also from the funders' perspective, we incentivize researchers to engage. So we're not objecting, we really want to support and play that broker role. And we have good examples where we convened workshops, and then Pascal talked about this one-to-one or more than one-to-one interactions, but face-to-face interactions. And we convened a series of workshops with the government departments that went very successful and then helped to develop those longer-term relationships as well. So I think the role for UKRI here is very important. So.
Fantastic, thank you. I will say incentives, Pascal's already mentioned them. On headed paper, a letter saying, yes, your research informed our policy thinking. A letter on headed paper saying, we support this academic in this funding application. This research is urgent and timely, and it will inform our future policy thinking. These are the incentives for academics to help you both impact and future research funding. Barriers, we have no time. We are already fully committed with teaching, research and admin. So I've written a blog about this called Jubilation, Trepidation, Exasperation. They are, as I have experienced, the possible reactions policymakers will face when they reach out to academics with whom they don't already have a relationship. And in that blog, I've given you some suggestions on the language that you might use when approaching academics for the first time. Being able to show to them what the incentives might be, whilst also acknowledging the barriers that they face. I think it's important for policymakers to know that policy engagement does not contribute to promotion or progression for academics in many, I would say most, universities. So this is stuff that we are doing because we want to, because we believe in it, because we know that it's helpful, because it is having impact. But we could be writing a book that would contribute to our promotion criteria. So once everybody knows that, I think we can be more realistic about the barriers and the incentives. Right, next question from Samuel Taylor. There are a significant number of ex-academics working in the civil service. So how could these individuals help at the policy-academia interface? Are the skills of these individuals currently being adequately utilised in the civil service? What do you think? James?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with some really great recovering academics in the civil service, and my experience is they are very well placed to act as a broker, to act as a translator. Often they're very well networked as well in academia. And the key thing for me is that trained academics are really good at spotting what good research looks like. Where are the good methods? Are these methods robust? Are they rigorous? How can we use this for policy? Is it appropriate to use this evidence in policy making? Whether or not ex-academics are used well in the civil service, all I'd say is my experience is on the whole they are. But if you're an ex-academic and you want your skills to be used more, perhaps you could make yourself available to perhaps the government science and engineering networks or the government social research networks, and just say that you've got that experience and chip in.
Brilliant. I would also say that these individuals might be interested in joining a UPEN subcommittee so that they might keep half a foot in the academic world whilst also sharing that information between the academic and the policy world, and the other way. They could act as brokers of knowledge exchange themselves. Okay, moving on to our next question. This one is from Sophia Papamanoli. It would be interesting to hear from the panel about ways to avoid the risk of tokenism, where scientists and researchers are essentially asked to provide a stamp of approval for a predefined policy. Pascal.
Yes, well, I go back to the point I made earlier about co-design and the timelines for proper research. So one of the things that is a little bit difficult, a barrier, I suppose, to policy engagement, is that your questions are often urgent, and our ability to provide the evidence in response to your questions will take a long time, because it has to fit in, as Arlene was saying, next to writing our monograph, teaching students, doing various administrative tasks. So we have very little research time, and of that you are asking a slice. So it will be long and thin rather than 100% of our involvement over 3 weeks that crunches all the numbers and gives you the answer. So you have to be aware of those timelines. And it does help if we can have long-term questions that we co-design with you, because at that point there is no sense that there is tokenism, because the question is genuine, the answer is genuine, and the academics will not compromise the evidence in order to fit in with a pre-existing agenda. So the answers might not quite be those that you were hoping for, is I suppose what I'm saying, but they will be the best of our knowledge, and I hope they will make for better policy.
Fantastic. And Christina?
Yes, I wanted to actually start with saying that respect for independent academic research is something I came across real strongly, and I think it's strengthening from experience to experience. And with it, of course, come that respect for the timeline, and I think we see it better. I certainly see it better, that and a willingness to engage in longer term timescales from design to delivery. And I think it's also important, and again bringing in back brokers' role, is that some research might already be there, but it's not known. But brokers will be able to help you to identify the existing research that you might want to connect, and you don't need to start from the beginning and have a quick win, and yet bring in independent knowledge to the mix. So I think use brokers, again, such as UKRI, but also other bodies that can link to the existing research. Thank you.
Fabulous. And James?
Yeah, we've already talked a bit about policymakers often drawing on their own pre-existing connections and relationships, and I feel like that type of dynamic can sometimes lead to tokenism. And we've talked about brokers and the importance of engaging brokers for diversity and variety. I'd also just say that I think in an ideal world you would have those relationships, those individual relationships, but you would also be drawing on the totality of evidence that is out there. And one way to do that is through looking at systematic reviews, which would summarise the full evidence base against a given question, and therefore help you pick out which parts of the evidence base you want to look at in more detail, rather than cherry picking particular people or studies.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important for policy colleagues to have at least a small network of critical friends or sounding boards that you can be sharing ideas with before you get to the point of asking an academic to rubber stamp something. And if an academic is going to rubber stamp something without having been involved in that conversation, then they're possibly not the right academic for you to be speaking to. Okay, moving on to another question. We have been talking so far about the relationship between academics and policy professionals. Often there are analysts in government who are also useful brokers or mediators. How can government analysts help without getting in the way? I've got an answer for this one. Let's hear James first.
I think my answer to this one is very similar to the answer I gave about the ex-academics. I mean, from my perspective, analysts in government are crucial. It's a crucial gateway for academics to access the policy-making world. And with our policy fellowship scheme, we actually choose to embed the policy fellows as much as possible into those analyst teams, because they're very good at translating academic research into policy. They're very good at interpreting the data. So they've definitely got a really positive and strong role to play in this space.
Fantastic. Yes, and I have had the great pleasure and privilege of working with a number of analysts and social researchers across government, and I have learned so much from them. So I have taken to them my research and my research findings, and they have been able to share with me their approach to analysis of data, which in some ways has been different or more innovative, I would say, than the methods that I've been using. And so together we've been able to co-produce reports which have then been published, and the published reports have been significantly higher quality and better pieces of evidence because of the input of analysts and social researchers. So I think that there definitely is the opportunity for academics to work collaboratively and successfully in a knowledge exchange partnership with these colleagues in government. Okay, I think we're moving on to our final question now. I really like this one about the puzzle. So, Jamie Woods asked, academic research and advice seems to be one piece of a fairly complex puzzle that policymakers put together to develop effective policies. Does the panel have any thoughts on whether academic advice generally takes up too little space in that puzzle, just enough space in the puzzle, or too much space in the puzzle? What's your perspective?
Oh, happy to start. Oh, Christina's got her hand up. Christina, you can start.
I'm happy to start. I think never too much. I don't think we've seen examples when it's too much. Just enough, maybe. Sometimes a little space. And again, it comes back to the timescales, because we talked about it several times today, that policymakers work to deadlines, and that always corresponds with the timeframes of academic research. And again, longer term engagement and knowing each other, developing that longer term connections will help to take more space in the puzzle at the short term as well, short notice as well. And so we talked a lot about design. I will not repeat it, but again, using brokers, knowing what is out there to fill in the jigsaw pieces in the puzzle with existing knowledge already, rather than looking always for new answers, because answers probably there already. Thank you.
Fantastic. And let's go to James next.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that academic research isn't used enough in government policy making. I think there is an underutilisation of the research innovation system in many situations. If you look at the big challenges we face as a society, climate change, reducing regional disparities, adapting to artificial intelligence, all of those big challenges require us to use research and evidence to appropriately address them. But what I would say is that there are some areas where you probably don't need that research as much. If you're working on a business as usual delivery area, and maybe you don't need the research as much. If you're working on a really new, innovative area, or where there isn't much known, perhaps you do need more research and innovation to be feeding in. So I think you can judge how much research you need. I think the other thing I'd highlight is that government economists do this really well. So with the Green Book, with appraisal processes, government economics has embedded economic analysis into most government policy making, and I'd ideally like to see something similar for broader research and evidence across the breadth of policy making. I think there are teams in government thinking about how that can be done. I know the evaluation task force in the Cabinet Office, for example, is thinking about how can we better embed evidence and research across the full breadth of government activity. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much to my panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise on widening the evidence base for policy by working with academics. I would love to thank the audience members who have chosen to join us for this warm-up act for the Policy Profession Awards. We hope that you have learned about our 3 key things that we wanted to share with you today. First of all, how to access a wider range of research. Secondly, how to make connections. And thirdly, how to access funding in order to make those connections inform your policy thinking. I would like to remind you that the recording of this event will be available 2 hours afterwards. So if you've watched this and thought it was fantastic, I want people in my team to know about this, then you can direct them to the recording. James, Christina, Pascal and myself are all very easily findable online. So if you would like to follow up with any of us afterwards, please feel free to do that by email. And again, I've written several policy profession blogs. I would encourage you to write policy profession blogs. I would also encourage you to write blogs for UPEN, the university's policy engagement network. The more we can do to show that academia and policy are in collaboration and communication with each other, the more we will benefit both communities. So thank you again for joining us for this session, and I hope to see you at several policy or academic conferences and events in the near future. Bye.